Toiru, toiru agdohi Yishu, ischaneni.
So this share usually is either on Parshas Shavua or on Inyona D'Yoyma. And today we will be discussing Parshas Shavua towards the end of this year, but one of the most relevant questions now in Inyona D'Yoyma, the entire Jewish people is talking about the dilemma we are presently in Eretz Yisrael, needing to free terrorists, murderers, to get our children back. Is that legitimate? So who was the first one to go to war to free hostages? Who knows? Avraham Avinu. Leit Ochiv was a hostage and he went to war. How many soldiers did he take out to war, Avraham Avinu? Who remembers? 318. Not a huge army. Probably some elite units. 318 soldiers, and they went to war. And he was successful in bringing them all home. Another source, who remembers? Another source? In Parshas Matos, the Kanani, Vayish Memenu Shevi. But there, the Torah doesn't tell us were they successful in bringing them home. And probably that was Malchemes Mitzvah, was a Kanani Be'eretz Yisrael. Rashi writes, Vayish Memenu Shevi, Shivcho Achas. Only one, and we know nothing about what happened to her. Was she safely rescued or not? Does anybody remember Sefer Shmuel? Shmuel Aleph, Perek Lamed, the Amalekim attacked Ziklag, and they took a lot of prisoners, and David HaMelech goes into war, and he brings them home. Do you remember a story of Reish Lakish? Well, it's Yerushalmi, Perek Ches, Masechet Rumis. Yerushalmi says Rav Amy, probably one of the Ameroim, was snatched by hoodlums, by thugs, into a forest. Probably they were cannibals. And Rabbi Yonason says, what a pity. We need to prepare tachrichim for Rav Amy. No chance they'll come out of there alive. And Reish Lakish, you know the story of Reish Lakish? He was a Baal Tshuva. And before he was a Baal Tshuva, what did he do? I don't know exactly what he did, but he was a martial arts expert. He was a fighter. And Reish Lakish says, I'm going into the forest. Either I'll get killed or I'll kill. But I'm going to try to save Rav Amy. Goes into the forest, and he brings him safely home without a fight. Obviously, they were so terrified of Reish Lakish. Maybe they knew something about his talents, and they gave him over. So that is not the time of war. It's just an individual. And that goes memoini is in Turchish Mishpot Simen Tav Chov Hey wants to prove from the story that a person is mechuyev to put himself in danger to save another person from a greater danger. So Rav Amy was in mortal danger. Ad Kedei Kach, Rav Yonason said, we need to prepare a levaya. Shluker says, I'm going to try to save him. So that's a big shaila in halacha. Does a person need to put himself into a certain sakana to save another from a greater sakana? This is a relevant question, not dealing with war, but dealing with medicine. So a few decades ago, they started doing kidney transplants from live donors. And the question many Gedolim dealt with, is a person allowed, maybe obligated, to donate the kidney to save another person? Today this is commonplace, and the Frum community leads the entire world by far living kidney donors. Why do I say this? Because for many years the Frum community was attacked. You don't have compassion. You don't donate organs to save people. But today, from society, Haredi and modern Orthodox, lead the entire world by far, living kidney donors. And I say to all those detractors of the Frum community, it's much easier to give away your heart when you're dead than giving away a kidney while you're alive. So we care more about others than anyone else in the world. Kol hakavod, it's really very nice. You give away your lungs and your heart and your eyes after you're dead. It's not such a big sacrifice as giving away a kidney while you're alive. And the question was exactly this question. Today, the sakana, the danger for the donor, is very, very low. It's almost non-existent. But 35 years ago, there was a substantial danger till they perfected the technique and the medicine. And the question was, my father, my brother, my family member will die without a kidney within 2 or 3 years. So I'm saving him from a tremendous sakana and taking upon myself a certain sakana. And that is the question of the Yerushalmi, Perek Ches Metrumes. But let's come back to our issue. So is it okay to free terrorists in order to save our own from their hands? Mishnah gitten daf mem hey ein poidnes shvuim yesem kedei dameim mipnei tikkun oilam. Chazal were metaken. You cannot free prisoners and pay an exaggerated price mipnei tikkun oilam. So first of all, how do we define an exaggerated price? How do we define a price, b'chlal? Do people have a price? I mean, how much is a person worth? So what do Chazal mean when they say, Ein poidnes ashuam yoisem kedei dameim? Could anybody guess? Could anybody guess? How do we define yoisem kedei dameim? How much is a person worth?
Going rate in the market to be by the shvuyim.
Is there a market for shvuyim?
The time of the Gemara was a common occurrence.
Slave market. Yeah? To be sold down the Mississippi. Does anybody know what that means? So in America, once upon a time, black people were sold down the Mississippi from the north to the south, and that's where the big markets were, or the other way around. And that's what most Meforshim say. Yoisem kedei dameim is how much is this person worth? So according to this interpretation, if he's a 25-year-old bum that goes to the gym every day, and he really has big muscles, we'll pay $10,000 to get him out. But if he's the Gadol Ador, he's 75 years old, and he remembers Bavli and Yerushalmi Baal Peh, how much would a person pay to have him as a slave? $50? So to redeem the Gadol Ador, we can't pay more than $50. But that young guy that instead of spending his time in yeshiva goes to the gym for a workout every day, we're going to pay much more. Not reasonable. Doesn't make sense. So maybe a Gadol Ador, people will pay a lot of money to have them sit in his house and teach his kids and teach his Eneklach Torah, but he still would have a higher price. I don't know. Depends where. That Adbaz, yeah, we have it. The last source on our sheet offers a different pshat in Yoisem kedei dameim, how much the Goyim would pay to get one of theirs out of custody. So even though everybody knows that Jews would pay 10 times as much as Goyim, because nobody cherishes life more than Jews, Chazal teaches us, but we won't pay more than non-Jews pay to get their ones safely home. So that's another pshat. How do we define the mayhem? Yoisem kedei the mayhem. What is the tikkun oilam? So the Gemara is mesupek. Iboyelehu hay mipnei tikkun oilam mishum doch kedei tziburahu oidelma delo ligrevu velai sutfei. Why did Chazal make it a kana? Don't pay more than kedei dameim. Is it because there's a limit how much we could demand from the tzibur? You know, the tzibur needs to give money to hold a cheder and a yeshiva and a koil and to support Hanchunos's kala and build shuls, and how much could we take out of the tzibur? That's why Chazal were talking, if you're going to spend an exaggerated sum to get people out, we won't have enough money. Or maybe we're going to be encouraging those Rishonim to snatch more Jews off the street because they see it's the best investment, you know. It's the best way to make big money. So if the reasoning is dochid tzibur, it's not relevant in our case because it's not about money. It's about freeing terrorists. But if the chashash is deloi ligravu velaisu, it is very relevant. You know, if they're going to get 1,000 terrorists for one Jewish soldier, as they got a few years ago, then they'll always try to do it again and again. So let's have a look at the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. What is the halacha? Duchke de tzibura or de lo ligravu velaisu? Brings us to source number 9. Ein point neshuam yosek kedei de meimem nei tikkun oilam shelo ya oivim roit v'machareim lishaboisan. It's not about duchke de tzibura, not because we don't have enough money, because we're afraid, we're encouraging them to do it again. Shulchan Aruch, Siv Daled, source number 7. Ein point neshuam yosek kedei de meimem nei tikkun oilam shelo ya oivim moislem atzmam aleim lishaboisan. Oh. So both the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch say, de lo ligru. So it's relevant today as well. But this brings us to another question. The famous story in Gittin Daf Nun Ches. On our sheet, it's source number 3. And even people that didn't learn Gittin usually know about the story because, you know, Tisha B'Av, we usually learn the Sugya of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the stories of the Churban. מעשה רבי יהושע בן חנניה שהולך לכרך גודל שברוימי. אמרו לו, תינוק אחד יש בבייס אסורין, יפה עיניים, טוב רואי וקבצותיו סדורות לו טלטלם. So probably a Hasidic boy with payas, curly payas. קבצותיו סדורות לו טלטלם. And Rבי יהושע בן חנניה says, הולך ויומד על פסח בייס אסירים. And he asks the question, מי נוסן למשיס יעקב יסור לבייס אסירים? And the young child answers, and Rabbi Shua ben Chananya says, Muftechani b'zeh she'yeh moira ha'irua b'Yisrael. Eini zaz mikan, ad she'evdene b'kol moment she'pois k'molav. So my first question is, what did he see in that child's answer that he was so inspired and moved, and he was confident that he's going to be a Godel b'Yisrael? That's the Posek in Novi Yeshayahu. So obviously, the child was Boki b'Tanach, but does that make him a Godel b'Yisrael? So let me share with you what I said many times. Mi nosen lemeshisa Yankov Yisrael b'Yisrael. Who bears responsibility? What does the Posek say? Haloi zeh Hashem choton oloi, v'loi avu b'drochav haloich. This is a strange formula. Either it should say, Aloi zeh Hashem chatanu lo, v'lo avinu b'drochav haloch, v'lo shamanu b'kolo, or on the other hand, Aloi zeh Hashem chat'u lo, v'lo avu b'drochav haloch, v'lo shamu b'kolo. It starts with us, and then it goes over to others. That's godless. Before pointing fingers and blaming others, you always need to first ask, where did we fail and where do we need to be better? So this child, a young child, torn away from his parents, rotting away in the Roman dungeon, knowing what are his chances to ever be free. It was so easy to point fingers at the Romans, at the Biryonim, that went against the Chachamim, and they caused this tragedy. So easy to blame others. And this child has the courage to say, Haloi zeh Hashem chotanu lo. It is first of all about us, and only then. V'loi avu b'drochav haloich, v'loi shamu b'koiloi. But first, we need to do our own cheshbon nefesh, and that is godless. And that is why Reb Shua ben Anna says, this will be a moira ha'irua b'Yisrael. But the question is, he paid A huge sum of money, the Gemara says, it goes against the Mishnah in Poidnes Yeshua Yosim Kedei Demeim. 3 terutzim in Tosfos. Source number 4. Ki yikas sekones nefoshes Poidnes Yeshua Yosim Kedei Demeim. Kedemina beperek hashalecha b'moicher atzmai v'zbono. Kol shkin hoche de ike katola. So if the prisoner's, the hostage's life is in danger, we pay any price. The Ramban disagrees. Because the Ramban argues every prisoner's life is in danger. And we cannot say there are different levels of danger. Inami muflig b'chochma hayom. Talmud Chochem has a different din. And let's have a look at the Meiri. Why does the Talmud Chochem have a different din? Kol shken Talmud Chochem ein lo yitamuro. We need leaders. We need teachers. Klal Yisrael cannot exist without them. So Talmud Chochem muflig b'chochem shani. Those are 2 terutzim daf nun ches. Daf mem hey, Tosfos gives number 3. Tosfos daf mem hey, source number 2, also says muflag b'chachma. Inami b'shas chorban abayis lo shayach de lo ligrevu. That was shas chorban. And b'shas chorban, there is not a chashash they might take others. They took as much as they could took. They killed as much as they could kill. Beis Yisrael, the Meshiso, devastation was everywhere, and therefore, b'shas chorban, you just try to save whomever you can. 3 terutzim. Which of the 3 terutzim are relevant in our case? It's not shas chorban. What happened, Simchas Torah, was horrific, but it's not shas chorban. They can't just come in and take whomever they wish. Talmidei Chachamim, most of the people in their custody are not the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of the generation. After all, most of the people living down south in the kibbutzim, precious Jews, each and every one of them is a Helegi Yiddish and Neshama. But the teretz of Tosfos to bring a muflag b'chachma or a Talmud Chacham out is not shayach. But if sakana would be a reason to pay any sum, never were prisoners in such a great sakana as those that are with the Hamas. They proved Simchas Torah what type of people they are. Animals, worse than animals. Animals don't kill because they love to kill. Animals kill when they're hungry and they need to eat. And therefore, if the heter to pay an exaggerated sum is mishum sekana, we would say, this case, anything they ask for. So let's have a look once again at the Shulchan Aruch. Once again, Sif Daled. Ein po yishuim yesik edei demem, and they take it away them. Shelo ye'oivim moisem atzmam lishboisem. Aval odem yochel livdos es atzmai bekol ma sheyetze, v'chein letalmid chochem. Afilu ein letalmid chochem, ele shetalmid choref, ve'efshe sheyeh odem godel, poid noisoi. That's the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya and Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Shechinuch doesn't mention sekana. So obviously, the halacha is kedivrei Ramban. Sekana is not a factor. So how about our story? Do you know anything about the story of Maram Rutenberg? Who was the Maram Rutenberg? Who knows? A Rishon or an Achron? A Tana or an Amoira? Who was the Maram Rutenberg? Who were his Talmidim? Besides the Rosh? And besides the Mordechai? I'm impressed. The Mordechai, the Rosh, Hagos Maimonides, and the Rambam. It was a terrible period in Jewish history, the Crusaders. The Mordechai and the Goyes Maimonides were murdered by the Christian crusaders, and the Rosh needed to flee. He ran away. Maram Rothenberg was jailed, and they demanded a huge ransom to free him. And the Jewish community came up with the money, and Maram Rothenberg refused to be freed. And he said, Ein poiden es shvuim yoisem kadei demei. He was 7 years in prison, and he passed away in prison. And even though there was the money was on the table, the Maram Rothenberg refused, and he said, Ein poiden yoisem kadei demei. And the Marshal asks, but a Talmud Chochem has a different din. That's what Tosfos says. And there was no greater Talmud Chochem than Maram Rothenberg. So why did he refuse? Let's have a look at the Yam Shel Shlomo. Shomati, at the end of the fourth line, Shomati al Maram Rothenberg zechroina levrocha shoya tofes b'migdal Eigesheim Kameshonim. Vasar tova menakele sach godol. והקהילס היו רוצים לפדותו, ולא הניח. כי אומר, אין פה נשמעים עושים כדי ימיהם. ותמה אני, מאחר שויו תלמוד חוכם מופלג, ולא היו כמויסוי בדוירה, בתוירה ובחסידוס, ושור אליו דויסי בכל המומנט שביולום. ואם מרוב אנבסנוסוי לא רוצה להחזק עצמי תלמוד חוכם מופלג, maybe it was such a huge honor, he didn't really know who he was, and he didn't think he was so great. מכל מקום היה לו לוחש על ביטול תורה. כאשר כוסף בעצמו שהוא יושב חושך וצלמובס, בלי תורה ואוירו, והיה מקונן שלא היו אצלו ספרי הפויסקים ותוספות, ואיך לא היה חש לבוא עם ביטול תורה, מאחר שרבים צריכים לו. So the Marshal explains, בוודאי דעתו היו, שהם יבדו אויסוי, אם כן יש למחש שלא יעשו כן כל הסורים לתלמוד חוכם המופלג שבדור בעבור רויב מומן. So the Marshal, this is a spark of genius. When Abishur ben Hananiah realizes that that little boy in the Roman prison will be a genius, the Romans weren't aware of that. Because the Romans didn't ask Minos and Lamashisa Yaakov Yisrael Aboizazim. And the Romans wouldn't understand when he would say, Eloizeh Hashem Chotonu Lo. So to the Romans, he was just a Jewish boy like all the others. But the Germans that put Maram Rothenberg into jail knew who he was. So Maram Rothenberg thought, if they're going to pay a lot of money to get me out, I am putting in danger all the other Gedolim. Because they will understand that for a good will be a soul, the Jews will come up with any sum. And that is why he said, when Tosfos say to get a Talmud Chacham out of prison, you pay any price. Because to the Goyim, there's nothing special about him. Just like all the others. But if they take Maram Rothenberg into prison because they know he's the Godel, and they're going to let a huge ransom, then I am putting all the other Gedolim in danger, and that is why he refused. So that's an amazing story. Let's read another line. Hoya b'dat, that kol Talmud Chochem muflag shebedor, ba'avur av momen, ad shelo yasvek momen agoyin lev doisam, v'tishtakech Torah mi-Yisrael. כי גם שמעתי שהיו בדעת אויסי צוירה לתפוס גם את הראש תלמידו ונודע לו ובורח לתוליתילה וניצול ברחמוב וברוב חסודו. ומשומוך אומר החוסיד מוטב שטויבד מעט חוכמס התוירה מישראל ממה שטויבד חוכמס התוירה עיקר. So that's a very powerful svara. So I told you the Mordechai and the Goyes Maimonides were murdered, and the Rosh runs away to Tulitila. Tulitila is Toledo. Toledo is one of the major cities in Spain. So we ran away from Germany, and Spain then was an Islamic country. And in that period of history, the Jews got along very well with the Muslims. And in Spain, there were no redifis. And the Rosh comes to Toledo. And then something unbelievable happens, unprecedented in the history of Torah. The Rosh was a pure Ashkenazi, Talmud of Maram Rutenberg, and all the Sephardi Kehilas in Spain took the Rosh as their leader and as their posek. I don't think ever before or after was an Ashkenazi accepted by the entire Sephardi community. Only Rabbeinu Osher. I was thinking, should I give it a try? Nah, I don't think it'll work. So I'm not going to embarrass myself. But that's the story of the Rosh. Probably because on the way to Toledo, he visits Barcelona and he visits the Rashba. And he spends time with the Rashba, and the Rashba was very nespoiled from this young Talmud Chochem. The Rashba was about 35 years younger than the Rashba. And the Rashba writes in one of his letters that the Rosh, he met the Rosh and he has a Svara Yeshora. And the Rashba was king of the Sephardic communities. So when they heard that the Rashba was nespoiled of the Rosh, then they all took the Rosh as the leader of all the Sephardi communities. So the Rosh has to flee, and he runs away, and he saves his life and the life of his family. So that's the story about Ein Poidnes Shvuyim. Is all this relevant to our situation? No. No, it's not really relevant for many reasons. First of all, in the Mishnah and in all the previous sources, it was about money. And the fact is that Maram Rothenberg was 7 years in prison. He wasn't tortured. He died a natural death. It was about money. This time it's not about money. It's about freeing terrorists. So in those days, their concern was they might take more Jews into custody. Our concern is not only they're going to try to capture more Jews, but freeing hundreds of terrorists, those people will go back into terror and they'll kill more Jews. So l'chayra, in our case, there's much more room lahachmir. On the other hand, we're living in a different world, and today we are a state, we are a malchus, and not just a little town or a little community. And a malchus needs to take many more things into consideration. And every soldier that is willing to go out into battle and put his life at risk needs to know that if I will be captured, my country will do anything to bring me home. And that is part of the morale of the army. And it is unbearable for the country to just be mafkia, women and children, just to their death. Because if we want to apply the Mishnah Aloha Lamaisa, let's go back to source number 1. There's another din in the Mishnah. Ein poidnes shvuyim yoisim kedei dameim mipnei tikkun olam ve'ein mavrichen es shvuyim mipnei tikkun olam. If the goyim take Jewish prisoners, you're not allowed to try to free them. You're not allowed to try to free them by force or by tricks. You're not allowed to try to free them. Mipnei tikkun olam. Because they're going to be more harsh with other prisoners. So if we apply both halachas of this Mishnah to the present situation, what would the outcome be? You can't try to free them by force. That's the seifa, ein mavrichen es shvuyim. You can't release terrorists because ein poid yoisim kedei dameim. So we just need to say goodbye. You know, they're going to be with the Hamas. They're all going to be murdered and tortured, which is an unbearable situation in this world, and the country will just fall apart. So therefore, ein ledamois. So what do we do? So I just want to quote 3 sources of Gedolei Yisrael, present-day Gedolim. Reb Moshe, the Steipler, and Reb Avad Yosef, who dealt with similar questions, because it's not the first time in the history of modern Israel that this is happening. It's with us all these years. Wars, terrorists, snatching Jewish soldiers and holding on to them. It's not the first time. And I'm going to bring 3 sources specifically about civilians in the custody of terrorists, because that is part of our present-day dilemma, not only soldiers. Tovshin Lamed, 1970. Nobody sitting in this room was alive in 1970. Maybe some of the Rosh Yeshivas. 1970, planes were snatched out of the skies and forcibly landed in different destinations. Terrorists snatched planes, hijacked planes. 2 planes were taken to Zarqa in Jordan. And one of those 2 planes, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner and his family, was there. And 3 weeks they were prisoners of the jihad, of a terrorist organization. And there was a huge discussion, what do we do? Some people wanted to come up with a big sum of money to free Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner. But that would make an awful impression in the world, that we leave all the others, the women, children, and we're just going to take out Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, of course, and Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was very much against that, concerned with the huge Chilul Hashem that it will cause in the entire world. And Moshe Feinstein wrote a letter, short letter, but I saw the letter, and the letter was addressed to the American government, to the British government, and to the Israeli government, and he said, it is legitimate to negotiate and free terrorists to bring all those hostages home. Didn't explain why, but that is what he wrote. That was Tovshin Lamed. Tovshin Lamed Vav, a plane was hijacked and taken to Entebbe in Uganda. And the leader of Uganda in those days was a totally deranged, crazy person named Idi Amin. And he cooperated with the terrorists. He was a Sunni Yisrael, a big anti-Semite, and a crazy person. And once again, the question came up. The terrorists demanded that we free 100 of their terrorists that were prisoners. And Sefer Orchos Rabbeinu. Is anybody familiar with the Sefer Orchos Rabbeinu? It's about the Stipler. It was written by Rabbi Avram Horovitz, who was a Ben Bayis. And both in Chelik Aleph and Chelik Beis, he writes, the Sefer is not very professionally written, and that's why it's so interesting, authentic. And he writes, I took a walk with a Stipler, and he said, Mebalbelim li et harash. They're driving me crazy. They want that I and Rav Shach should go to speak to the Prime Minister Rabin about the hostages. And why would the Prime Minister be interested in hearing the opinion of 2 old rabbis? That's what the Stipler told me. Well, why would he be interested? And then he went into a halachic discussion. And he spoke about the Mishnah, 2 reasons in the Gemara, Dorke de Tzibura, Lo Ligre Vavalaiso. And at the end he said that I'm against freeing terrorists, but if the government would decide to do so, yesh lem al ma sheyismoch. It depends on the terutzim and taisus. They have what to rely on. A day later, I came to the Stipler, he writes, and I told him they were freed by force, by a military operation. Usamach Mod, he was very happy. V'shibeach et ha-meshachrarim. He praised the Israeli soldiers, and he wasn't afraid to praise the Israeli soldiers. He didn't think there's anything wrong with that. And he said, only the Jews with their Mesiras Nefesh could do such an operation. Very nice. That's the story of the Stipler. Number 3, Rav Ovadia. Chelik Yud Yabia Omer Choy Shemish B'Tziman Vav. He has a long tshuva about freeing terrorists to bring our people home. And that tshuva is about 30 pages with 10,000 sources. Most of them, I don't even know who they are. But that's typical for the Abia Omer. And the last chapter in that tshuva is about Entebbe, about this specific case. And he writes that the prime minister at the time was Yitzhak Rabin, asked me for a halachic opinion. And we got together a group of Gedolim, and we paskined that the government is allowed to negotiate, and if there's no other way, to free terrorists. Who are those Gedolim? In my personal Yabia Omer, which I got from Rav Avadia with a beautiful dedication, I had a very special relationship with him. He doesn't write who they were, but in the last edition, he writes, Rav Elyashiv, Reb Shimon Zalman, Reb Tzalel Zolti, and some other Gedolim. Those were the greatest Gedolim of the time, and they sat together. And then he writes, before we really formulated our response, the Prime Minister came, and he gave us a B'sura Toiva. They were freed by a military operation. And then Rav Avadia becomes, not Rav Avadia the Poisik, but Rav Avadia the poet. And he writes about 5 beautiful lines thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Nisim and the Flois, and praising the Israeli soldiers for this daring operation. And it was a Kiddush Hashem. So that's the tshuva in Yabia Omer. 4 Jews were killed in that operation. It wasn't without loss. So definitely Ein Mevrichin is not relevant. Ein Mevrichin, as I said before, in the situation that they took prisoners for money. They're not going to get money. There's a fair chance they'll let them go. I mean, these guys will cost them money. You need to feed them. You need to maintenance of the prisons. If it doesn't pay, if you're not going to get any money, they'll let them go for a minimal price. That's not the case today. And therefore, both Ein Poiden and Ein Mavrichin are not relevant. Because the situation is a totally different situation. So all these 3 Gedolim were very happy if we don't need to release terrorists, even though a military operation always comes at a cost, and it came at a cost then as well. 4 Jews were killed. But it's the best option. Freeing terrorists would cause to lose many more lives. So this is an interesting historical period, and a psak of 3 of the greatest Gedolim of our generation. So in this week's Parsha, Esav is going to meet Yankov is going to meet Esav, and he doesn't know what to expect. Once again, he's going to meet a murderer. And all Yankov knows is, last time he and Esav were together, Esav was out to kill him and needed to run away. And now he's going to meet Esav. Rashi brings, and the source is a Medrash Rabbah Koheles Perek Tes. Yankov prepares himself for 3 things: Tefillah, Doiron, Melchama. First thing is Tefillah. And we go to fight an enemy. When Yankov goes to meet Esav, Tefillah is the most important thing, because we believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we believe in Hashgacha, and we believe in the Koyach HaTefillah. Like the Pasuk says in Tehillim, Im Hashem lo yivne bayes shav amlo boinav boy. Im Hashem lo yishma'i shav shakad shoyma. Im Hashem lo yishma'i shav shakad shoyma, everybody could appreciate. Because in war, you never know how successful you are in safeguarding your city. You don't know what's the power of the enemy. But the bigger revusa is, Im Hashem lo yivne bayes shav amlo boinav boy, because b'derech hateva, you have a plan, you have an engineer, you have the materials. B'derech hateva, you know exactly what you're building, and it's biyatcho. It's within your means. But the pasuk says, don't think so. Don't think so. You will achieve nothing without siyata d'shmaya. You could build a build, and everything will fall apart. You could build the most beautiful castle, and then a tiny little earthquake will make it all tumbling down. Im Hashem lo yishma'i shav shakad shoyma, ve'im Hashem lo yivne bayes shav amlu boinav boy. So Yankov Avinu, before anything else, before making any strategic plans, First, he davens. Because without tefillah, you will achieve nothing. And you shouldn't think, koichi v'oitzim yodi osu li esachai alazeh. V'zochartu ki Hashem elokechu hu anoisen lechu koyach lasas choyol. And that is an eitzah for every endeavor in life. Definitely when you're going to meet an enemy and you need siyata d'shmaya. Number 2 is dairon. We don't like wars. We don't like to kill. And in this week's parsha, V'yiro Yankov ma'oid v'yetzer loi, Rashi brings, V'yiro Yankov ma'oid shema yahareg. Yankov is afraid he might be killed. V'yetzer loi, he's pained because he might kill. Whom is he going to kill? Esav and his people. Abu lahorgach hu ashkem lahorgoi. Yes, it's what we need to do, but we're never happy to kill. So Yankov is afraid he might be killed. V'yetzer loi shema yaharog. And if he's going to kill someone, he's going to kill his enemy, and he's not happy about it. Our chazon of achas hayomim is v'garzev keves v'nomer gedi yerbats. And therefore Yankov hopes doiron. He hopes to be able to appease Esav without any bloodshed, neither from him, his family, or from Esav. But if doiron doesn't work, then the option number 3 is Malchama. And when we go to Malchama, Kodesh Baruch Hu is with us, and he will be with us. So in this week's parsha, Yankov's name is changed to Yisrael. Unlike Avraham, who was transferred from Avram to Avraham, and the Gemara says, HaKoirel Avram Oiver Ba'asei, Yankov's name was just added. Yankov plus Yisrael. So when the Malach talks to Yankov, he says, Lo yakuroi shimchi Yankov ki im Yisrael. But then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yankov, your name will be Yisrael, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls him Yankov. And Chazal learn, no, Yankov wasn't changed into Yisrael. Yisrael was added on to Yankov. There's some Sefer says a gewaldige Wort. He says, Yankov Yisrael is begematria kras Satan. Kodesh Baruch Hu will destroy the Satan. And the Malach that battled with Yankov, who was the Satan? Do you expect the Satan to say kras Satan? The Satan isn't suicidal. He has no plans to commit suicide. And therefore the Satan hopes that Yankov is out and Yisrael is in. But he would never tell Yankov, your name will be Yankov Yisrael, because that's Begamati Ekras Soton. Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Yankov, there should be no mistake. Yankov is not out. It's Yankov plus Yisrael. And I promise you, at some stage, Kras Soton. Such an amazing word. I never do this. But I did count the gematrias, and it doesn't add up. Doesn't add up. Because Yankov Yisrael is begematria 723, and Kras Soton is 729. So what is the some Sefer talking about? And then I realized it's gewaldig. Because Rashi brings in Parshas Eikev, B'chamisha Mekoim is katuv Yankov Molei, B'chamisha Mekoim is katuv Eliyahu Choser. 5 times in Tanakh it's Eliyah without a vav. 5 times in Tanakh it's Yankov with a vav. So the Gemara says, Eliyahu Novi promises Yankov Avinu, I will at the end of days be the Mevasa, and I will bring the B'sura to your children. Shnaz Ge'ulchem Bo. And Yankov makes Eliyahu a promise. And the Maral says, why is it a vav and why 5? So the vav resembles a finger. And on a person's hand, 5 fingers, which indicates Yankov took a tkiyas kaf from Eliyahu and he made him swear. Promise is not enough. And that's the 5 vavim, which is keneged Chumash it's boys, and that's why it's a vav and not any other letter. So Eliyahu promises Yankov, I will come to your children and tell them that the Geula is here. And if we add on the vav to Yankov, it is 729. And it's perfect gematria. Because when we're talking about the Geula, then it's Yankov Molei. And Yankov Molei is 729, which is exactly Ka'asoton. This week's Parsha, Ad Avoy El Adoni Se'ira, Baraturim writes, Avoy El Adoni Se'ira is Sof Tevis Eliyahu. Let us realize, Eliyahu without the Vav. Because as long as we're in Golus, it is Eliyahu. But when the time will come, then it'll be, no, it's perfect, because Ad Avoy El Adoni Se'ira, Rashi writes, they never met again. When Yankov says, Ad Avoy El Adoni Se'ira, that means Va'olo Moshiach Bahar Tzion Lishpat Esar Esav, and that will be the end of days. And then it'll be Eliyahu Chosor, because the Vav will be with Yankov and not with Eliyahu. So this Baraturim fits in beautifully with the Chassam Sofer. Let us hope that Eliyahu will fulfill his promise to Yankov. So Yankov Avinu was the one. Everything he did was for Klal Yisrael, the Doiros. So Mitzvah Shabbos, by Melav Malke, there are many Zmiris, but there are only 2 individuals that have a Zemer, L'chvoidam. Do you say the Zmiris Mitzvah Shabbos? Who are the 2 ones that have a special Zemer, Mitzvah Shabbos? Omer Hashem leYankov, Al Tiri Yankov, and Eliyahu Hanavi. Why is that? Because Rashi brings up Sadi going, 6 days of the week, or can I get Chital Fishnin Hava Alma? Shabbos is the Elef Hashviyah. Mitzvah Shabbos is called Sidus David Malka Meshicha. So Mitzvah Shabbos b'Malava Malka, that is the Seuda L'chvoid Melech HaMashiach. We sing a Zemer to Yankov, and we say, Yankov Avinu, don't be afraid. Eliyahu Hanavi will fulfill his promise. And time will come, B'Korah B'Yameinu. So we have a Zemer for Yankov Avinu, Al Tirav the Yankov. And then we have a Zemer for Eliyahu Hanavi. So let us hope that the B'Korah Eliyahu Hanavi will be fulfill his promise to Yankov, and Eliyahu will ultimately get his vav back after the Geula, and Yankov will say, thank you, Eliyahu, for doing your best, and we should deserve a B'Korah B'Yameinu, to be as Goel Tzedek, and Binyan Beis HaMikdash, B'mheirov Yomeinu, Amen.